But I will say, if I was to pick which gym that I would climb at for the rest of my life, it would be B Pump Ogikubo.
All right, Tim, my dude, how's it going, man?
Josh, my dude, what is up? How's it going?
You are no longer jet lagged. I'm sick again somehow, but we are on point. We are off of our, like, we do this cadence now, right? Where we have a guest and then it's you and me. And this week it's you and me. And it's good to be back with you, man.
It's nice. I personally look forward to these where it's just you and I very much appreciate having the guests, and I'm sure you guys, as listeners do as well. But there's something just nice to just chat with Josh. I mean, there's a reason why we started this podcast a long time ago, and it's mostly because we just talk on the phone all the time about climbing and just nerd it out for hours and hours. And so, it's reliable to come on and be like, no matter how tired I am or like, how jaded I am about something climbing, if I'm talking about it with Josh, it's actually like very therapeutic for me.
Yeah, I hope it's therapeutic for all you guys too. It definitely brings up the energy for me too. Like I was saying, I'm a little under the weather as someone who has 2 young kids. It's just like someone's always sick and always giving it to me. No excuses. But last week you were super jet lagged because you were just coming back from Japan. But, and before we got on, you were like, dude, I am struggling. But then I feel like after 10 minutes, just the climbing psych hits. We're talking to Tristan, just talking about all the things we love. And, energy just finds itself into the microphone.
Yeah. You know what I also like is we don't have, like, our podcast doesn't have expectations. And you mentioned this before, where like, we don't pretend to be anything other than like, we're kind of expert climbers, but other than that, we don't pretend to be anything else. We just share as much as what could be helpful. And I think that takes a lot of pressure away from performing on, some type of podcast, because we don't have to perform. We're just sharing what we want to share.
I'm always performing, Tim. I'm here. I'm bringing my A game. I've got extra big coffee. But
My bad.
What I do like is I love the not having to explain all the minutia. And I think our guests have been really enjoying that. And dude, we've had good guests lately. I mean, Carlo was incredible. And then we got to follow up with Tristan, who, I can't wait to kind of talk about a little bit more, but he's a, I don't want to say like underground crusher, but he called himself like a tier 3 athlete. And I thought I didn't like that because I was like, well, what tier does that make me? But I think he meant something like, we've got the best in the world, the Adam Andres, which, he didn't bring up, but I just love putting Adam Andres tier 1, even though, there's plenty of people up there with him. I shouldn't say plenty. There's a handful of people
like Yanya, Tamoa.
Yeah.
Those types of athletes as well.
All the people you can refer to in there with
anyone.
Name. Yeah. And then there's these tier 2, and I don't know exactly how he defines that, but I guess it's the really, it's the pro climbers that we all know and love. But maybe they just, I don't know if they walked into a gym in France, maybe people wouldn't recognize them, but you and me would sure know who they are. And, I think we highlighted that this like tier 3 or wherever, there is like a thriving scene out there. And I love giving like some, shining a light or giving a platform to those people. And I have a hunch that all of our listeners are really tapped into that tier that Tristan talks about. But that was such a big takeaway for me when I was in Colorado. And it's a good reminder that there is like, there is a lot of people out there climbing hard, climbing V15 consistently. And, there's a lot to learn from them. And in some ways, sometimes it's like better to learn from those people than people who, I shouldn't pick on Daniel Woods. I can even say this about Chris Sharma, where Sharma, unbelievably strong, just shows up, tries his best, really knows how to put it out there. Same thing with Daniel Woods. They're amazing climbers. I mean, some of my favorite climbers in the world, maybe the favorite climbers in the world, but I don't know if they're really the ones that would help us go from good to great. Like, and I think, getting that insight from Tristan, hearing a little bit about that struggle when you're on the cusp of being great, I don't know, there's more to learn, at least for someone like me, than I think, maybe even some of the tier 1 athletes have to offer.
Yeah, no, I think, super interesting, everything you just said. And I think I think it is interesting when he said tier 3. I think both of us were like taken back. We're like, whoa, what do you mean? It's like, actually, you're probably right. You probably are correct, but let's highlight some of the factors that you're talking about, because in terms of raw performance, it's not that much that separates the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. A lot of what you're saying is what we notice, and that kind of led to a lot of other conversations that we had on that podcast. So if you guys haven't listened to that one is it's different. It's a very different podcast, I think, from a lot of what we have otherwise, but for good reasons, kind of the reasons that Josh just mentioned, that Tristan is the type of climber that in some ways is a lot more relatable for everybody in terms of like how to go from good to great. And just, I don't know, I think that's what makes me sometimes like more appealing for coaching, like getting coaching, because people just believe that. But I think people believe me when I say like, no, I mean, I started from, 0 and got to where I got from literally, reasonable steps, in my opinion. I mean, I worked really hard in some ways, but like it's digestible, I think, for everybody. And that's nice versus the kid crusher who shows up and just sends. And like, while those people are also behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff going on. I think that's not as relatable. So
yeah. I mean, we shouldn't tear down anyone who just is like naturally really successful. But I will say that sometimes I was in this same camp where it's hard to articulate what you're doing right. Like, it's like, well, I don't know, that climb was easy for me. Like, and sometimes it would be that they're like, how you do that? How'd you do that climb? You're like, I don't know, that was freaking easy. And as you get older, you start to kind of, be able to pick it apart. And I think it's a really good tool because be able to deconstruct what's going wrong or why you did something allows you to kind of tackle harder grades. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Tristan. And I mean, we just did, but some of the other lessons that I got there, we're just talking about how to go from good to great. And Tristan, I had said on the pod, I had kind of met him while he was good, and good still being damn good, like, V13 climber. But he made this next leap into that like V15 and kind of solid V15. I mean, I don't think he's done a ton of them, but that's probably because he's not sitting there sieging them, and they still take a little work. V15 is still kind of hard. And my memory of him was that his feet did not stay on. Like, and I ripped on him on the pod, but it was no big, so it was not news to him. And I remember climbing, I went out there and I was close with Daniel Fong, and that's how I met Tristan. And let me tell you, Daniel's feet do stay on. And he would talk about Tristan. He was like, this guy's got wicked strong fingers, really strong, really knows how to try hard, but his feet are everywhere. And, he basically said that it was pure skill gains that got him to that next level. And there's going to be some people out here listening that are like, yeah, but I'm not that strong. But my hunch is that just in today's era where we see a lot of training, what we actually find more is that people are pretty wicked strong. And that's, I think, why we harp so much on that skill element, is that we find that people tend to be pretty darn strong and that they're lacking the ability to apply that strength. And so just a good reminder from Tristan that that's always a good way to level up, and it stays with you forever. Even after his bout with cancer, he kind of highlighted the fact that he still had that skill. It was still there and really helped him come back.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better myself. And I think a lot of what I got out of just the conversation with him, and just kind of hearing him talk about it, it's a little bit more direct, right? Because I think I have a very similar experience growing into my climbing and, learning every single day, honestly, getting constantly weaker in the last 3 years. Like for me, it was a very consistent decline in physical climbing strength, but a very rapid increase in skills, because it's what I started to pay attention to a lot more. And I was getting a lot better at climbing, and I was getting a lot weaker in a lot of ways. I'm actually like terrified every time to do a strength assessment, because it hits my ego, like personally, really hard, because it's where I relied on a lot of my ability was in my strength growing up, because I worked out so much and didn't have so much of an emphasis. And, nowadays I'm like, it almost doesn't matter, if I can, if I cap out at like 20 pull-ups or something, which is still a fair amount of pull-ups, but mind you, when I was like 19, I could do 60 pull-ups. So I'm losing like, the vast majority of my pulling strength. And I'm like, I don't see how this applies. Like, you as a climber, you eventually become in this place where you're like, just don't understand. And then you also, like Tristan, I think he was like much more direct and blunt about it. I would never really say this, but I very much agreed, where he's like, hey, you just watch people and you're like, the bro that looks like their feet are on the wall, and like climbing up this V9, they're not using their feet. Right. And like I constantly watch climbers and I'm like, wow, like you guys aren't using your feet at all, and like that, Tristan has this really good way of like sharing his opinions and like very directly. So exactly what he's talking about. I love that
Tristan,
about him.
blunt and direct. Really? Is that why maybe we called him the villain? Yeah. That does sound like him.
Yeah, that was really nice. I think for that type of point, where it's like, sometimes it is that simple, right? So sometimes we sugarcoat that, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm sure everyone could have better footwork. Where he's like, straight up, he's like, no, everyone has shit footwork. Like everyone that I watch climbing in this way, it's like, this is, blaringly bad. And I like that. It allows us to really be direct about this.
Yeah, I really felt seen when he said about the people putting their feet in the right place, and I didn't like it. I didn't like being seen. And I think I had this pro tip a long time ago, which is, just because you put your feet in the right place doesn't mean you have good technique, and really think about putting weight on them and trying to really use them as they're supposed to be used. And just that mental shift of trying to keep your feet on, trying to put weight on them. It's funny because sometimes you think there's like a big trick to technique, and often it's that consistent dedication towards putting weight like you should, and making that mental connection. And then there's physical adaptations too, where all of a sudden you realize one day that, wow, like my foot isn't cutting. Wow, I'm actually really rocked onto this foot. And but the trick is that it's not something you unlock and you're like, oh, like I decided to have better footwork and now I do. It's this effort that you put into the movements, this effort that compounds over time, and then you become a little bit better. It's almost like getting stronger, and it kind of is. But I just want to dispel the myth that like somehow like, Tim sends you a text message and he's unlocked your new level of technique. Like it's about understanding where to put your effort and then applying it consistently over forever.
Yeah, the word you're describing there is intention, right? Like effort is one thing, but intention is really the driving force behind that. And that's what I think carries climbers over time, is intention, because then you're making a choice, like a deliberate choice to use effort, right? And you've said that pro tip before, and you also have mentioned, I'm going to toot your horn a little bit, the constant feedback I get from clients or people who talk about the podcast, if they mention a pro tip, or your two pro tips are the thinking about your footwork and using your footwork, and thumbs. Thumbs have been like the most constant thing I've received, and I'm like, damn, that's like a pretty basic one, but you guys are probably right. Like that thought in using your thumb is, I guess, just like something that stronger climbers automatically think about, but you realize that the vast majority of rock climbers don't actually practice that. And so that's helped a lot of people. So good job, Josh.
Cool. I'm always psyched to have those pro tips get put into action. And the footwork one is no big surprise. The thumb one's a little bit shocking, because you would think that people who use their hands all the time would think about using their thumbs. It's surprising what that unlocks on pinches, and in certain cases, slopers. Just putting that effort, you're like, yeah, it's a pinch. Why am I only thinking of half of the grip? Get that thumb in there.
Mm-hmm. I had an interesting, on that note, my client of mine mentioned that before he had realized that he wasn't using his thumbs very much, he realized that the feeling of generating, or the feeling of using a hold actively, felt best for him when his thumb wasn't engaged. And he had only realized that when he started using his thumbs, because it was a myth, right? It was a myth that his body was telling him, where it's like, this is better. It feels better to do this. And there you go again with that word feeling. It's like, feeling isn't always the best, but we should observe over time what our feelings are actually telling us. And you'll find out that your feelings often tell you something that maybe doesn't come from an objective, logical place, right? Maybe they just come from a lot of reactions that you've had over time in climbing. And yeah, climbing's a sport where there's a million reactions happening at once, and you're not really doing the best job. Just telling you right now, as a climber, you're not doing the best job of absorbing all of those reactions and rationalizing them. So, we should check all of our reactions over time, and our thumbs being like one, grip orientation being a huge one, right? So like as a kid, I always open-handed everything. Is that the best way to climb crimps every time? No. But, I had to check that over time and fix it.
Yeah, and I would see a lot of the other side of things, especially because in my era, there was a lot of strong crimpers, and slopers were somewhat new to the climbing gym scene. And you'd see people crimping slopers all the time. Oh, it feels better like this. And you're like, okay, yeah, sure, maybe for this one move, but you're just putting a ceiling on yourself somewhere down the line. So, yeah, I love that. I think that's always a good reminder. Well, speaking of objective versus subjective, I thought I would comment really quickly on Tristan's very strong opinions on grading, which were interesting. I mean, this is the thing is, you know, why we like to bring Tristan on and really bring anyone on, whether, it's Carlo or Ethan or Al, anyone that we like bringing on here usually has opinions. And the whole point is that in a podcast, you can just say your opinions, hear a dialogue about them. It's easier to really share what you think in a long form style like this than like one tweet where like, I was careful. I felt bad. I definitely put like a clickbait title on for Tristan or like in the Instagram, like caption, like he's the villain. And it's like, it's a joke. But like it is, we do appreciate Tristan coming on and actually having an opinion, and his stuff on grading is interesting. And, he talked about this idea that grades are wholly objective, and objective means that without opinion, like there's no one, it's like if a rock was alone in the forest and no one had ever climbed on it. It's just like, this is like the grade. And then subjective was that thing he kind of went into where people were starting to define the V17 grade, like, shape it or have those opinions. And I'm kind of in his camp of there being a right and wrong answer to grades, but I'm not sure if I would go so far as to say that it's completely objective, that there's just a grade for this thing and, it is what it is, like, regardless. And I don't know, it's just fun hearing that standpoint though, because I think a lot of pros, and I think we've ripped on this before in the podcast, where a lot of pros don't want to deal with grades. They want it to kind of be this airy fairy, like, oh, like, grades don't matter. Like, it's all just about your flow state. And like, it's like, yeah, but you're a professional, like you're the expert. And I'll never forget, this Moses was a head setter of mine that I worked with. And I remember setting like a 10C or something. And the tag was a 10B. And, these guys setting are like 514 climbers. And to be honest, 514 climbers don't really love setting 510. And that's a shame, and that's why you often see like harder climbs are often set better. So, some people flip a 10A, some people flip a 10C. And at the end of the day, we look around and we have like 4 10Bs. And Moses is like, you guys, what are you doing? Like, I needed a 10C. I needed you need to know the difference between a 10B and a 10C. You're the expert. And it just really stuck in my head because, you can take this approach where you're like, hey, I'm super strong. Who cares? 10B, 10C, or whatever. It's like, no, like there are grades and we all, can kind of converge on them, whether they're on the, whatever end of the spectrum you want to say, objective or subjective. And I really have leaned into that idea that like, there's a discussion there and there's some kind of objectivity there, and that grades are kind of real, and that we shouldn't just try to sweep them under the rug, because let's face it, people really do care about them. And I love that Tristan isn't afraid to acknowledge that.
Yeah. I think we can go really deep into this discussion, so I'm going to be careful here. But I do think the one thing that was kind of hard about that conversation is I also am in the camp that grades are objective. Like, period, they are. Like one day in one form, the climb will, any movement, any assortment of movements on the climbing wall will amount to a difficulty, right? Regardless of size or skill. But the factors that make a climb objectively one grade aren't set out yet, right? The discussion between you and I, if you and I looked at a canvas and people put holes on the wall, you and I would have a subjective way of telling each other what grades we think they are, and they're pretty damn close to what the objective grades often are going to be. But because we don't have a way, like a key of looking at the wall and being like, oh, when you use this size hold and this orientation of this wall angle and this grit texture of each handhold, this is what the grade amounts to be. That does exist, but we just have no way of communicating that or, seeing it right away. So what's hard is like objective grades exist, but we don't have a way of using that standard. So, I had the same experience. It's funny that I think like really good head route setters will always give you this experience as a route setter, where you're going to start setting and the grade tags will be, decided. And especially at gyms where they use real grades and they take that very seriously. And a good head route setter will come and, your very first day route setting make you feel really shitty about your analysis of the numbers, because, and a good route setter will tell you that, I think in a mean way, come up and be like, what are you doing? Like there's a 10A, a 10B, a 10C, and a 10D that I flipped. And if you don't know the difference, you're not doing your job correctly. And you're sitting there like, what's the difference then? Tell me the difference, right? Like you haven't defined to me what the difference is. And they're like, that's the problem, is that there is no difference. Every member, every person will come in here and climb and, look at the number and have to try, right? And once they do that, they already have the experience, and you have to guide that experience by making the climbs different. I think, so what I understood at that time was that it doesn't matter what the 10A is and what the 11A is and what the 12A is. What matters is all of them related to each other, right? So when you pull onto the wall, as long as this grade has been defined by this gym, by their objective measures, that it's consistent, right? And it's consistent amongst each other. The relativity is consistent. And that was the only thing that I wanted to talk about, I think, when we had that grade discussion, was I just think it's relative to its own planet. And, each planet is going to have kind of a different thing. And because objective grades are going to be probably impossible in the long term to actually talk about, because we have no way of like measuring those factors really easily.
Well, maybe in the long term, things will get more. Things always head towards a more defined thing. But yeah, we're probably a ways off. But I think that's why the moon board is enjoyable too. Although, are those grades all over the place and really whack. But I can see like the goal there. Or, it's like this is a benchmark V6. And we all agree and we stay. And so then this next one should be a notch harder. But okay. Yeah, enough about grades. The other hot take that Tristan put out there was, I kind of surprised him with the overrated versus underrated question. And just in hindsight, I don't know. I guess my other friend said, he's like, hey, you were looking for the villain. Like, I'm glad you put that out there and got him to say something. But I think when we listened to it and we thought about it, what maybe wasn't perfect in that part of the podcast is that Tristan wasn't prepared and he didn't have the time to name off what are quote unquote a bunch of overrated climbers. And we should talk about those two that he listed kind of randomly specifically. But I thought you had a good point, Tim, where, like what did we mean by overrated, or what did Tristan mean by overrated? Maybe we're putting some words in his mouth, but maybe we could help define it a little bit better.
Yeah, I just think like people inherently like to brutalize these words, like overrated and underrated. And my feeling was that people who would listen to that would immediately assume that if we talked about someone who was overrated, that we would be shit talking the climber. But in no way are we saying those things. There are some objective things to like being overrated. And right now, I think something that's really important for all of us to understand about the climbing industry is what media favors to highlight. Right. And like what people favor to highlight. And, what, like just our discussion right now between a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3 climber and Tristan's definitions, like what are the actual differences? Like not that much, right? Like not that much. So, when a lot of climbers are getting a ton of media attention or like, a ton of whatever, those are the factors that they're deciding to highlight. And, when we're deciding to highlight certain factors, I think, Tristan is pretty hardcore in terms of like understanding performance in climbing. And I think the overrated thing was relative to performance in climbing. These people get a lot of attention, money, like whatever it is. And so I think that's really important to, when we're talking about like specifically, Tristan mentioned Taylor and Keenan and, probably name me, myself. Like we could probably name a bunch of other climbers who relative to performance, maybe the attention received isn't like so, correlated. But there's a lot of other people like that. And, obviously some easy names to pick, but, there's no negative, there's no shade behind any of it. And I think that's really important to kind of talk about.
Yeah. And I guess when you put the Taylor and Keenan up against like Almondra and Jakob Schuber or something. It's like, it, I think this is the point, is that in some ways, they all are really good. Like if maybe not you or I, but if some random person went into the gym and they saw, Keenan climbing next to Tomoa, like, they'd probably like not realize that there was any different in grade. But let's face it, and sorry, Keenan, like if you went out and got on a World Cup, platform, like Tomoa would be, would really show that he's freaking Tomoa. And so I think some of this talk about like overrated is just kind of, it's ridiculous in the sense that like Keenan is amazing. But like maybe if you're a climber, like Tristan, you can be like, yeah, but he's like, a notch down from these guys in this category. But the thing is that Keenan also is a notch up from Tomoa in like doing amazing, like wild FAs. And God, the work that he's done in Yosemite, I think is underrated. The FAs he put up, he is incredible in Yosemite. And, I don't know Taylor as well, but I will say that he has climbed some very sweet climbs and some very hard climbs. And, I'm not exactly sure why that immediately came to mind for Tristan. I don't know Taylor well enough, but I do know that he's
because Tay always posts tall not strong, and that's like one quick way to take away your accomplishments. But another thing to mention is that something that is underrated about climbers who do get famous or like well known for anything other than performance are the things that they're getting noticed for, right? Like we got to pay attention to the fact that some people are good at marketing, some people have extremely unique style, some people have outspoken opinions in a way that are only going to be noticed by media. And maybe climbing performance isn't the most important thing, or for a lot of people, right? That's something that media is showing us. But also, I think Tristan's, kind of hinting towards the fact that there are a lot more underrated climbers than you think, right? Like, the amount of names that you two both know that I don't really know who climb like probably V14 or harder. There's just a lot of those people, and I think Tristan is one of those people who are extremely underrated, when it comes to performance. But, it goes to show you like, some people who understand like media just don't care about that, and a lot of people who care about media also don't care about that. And so it's an interesting discussion always when it comes to like underrated versus overrated.
I just remember right when we clicked stop recording, he realized that he wanted to say that Andy Lamb was another part of that underrated crew. He was in Colorado with that whole crew, and his sister Katie is just going off right now.
Dude, Andy just sent the Meg in Squamish. Yeah, this guy Gabe in Squamish, who climbs a lot there, just put up the Meg, and I think he put it up at V16.
Yeah,
and Andy just did it.
Andy knows how to climb hard. He was actually Tristan was saying that Andy was a good example of someone who really knows how to execute, how to really show up in that moment with all of his abilities and just get it done. And maybe we'll get him on the pod at some point, because he's just this quiet. He also did Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is so he's got that V16 under his belt that no one will ever know if it's hard or soft, because it's now closed. All right. Anything else we want to say about the villain as we cover it?
That was good.
What about the whole thing that he survived cancer? That was amazing. I mean, we didn't really talk about it because it's like, it's funny because we asked him beforehand, like, should we talk about this? He was like, yeah, I mean, we got to bring it up. It's like, it's not something that he wanted to, or he didn't say he didn't want to focus on it. I didn't really want to focus on it. But the thing that just stuck with me after that conversation and talking with him even on the side about it was just how there was no excuses there. Not just even in his climbing world. It wasn't something that like, he was like, hey, this bad thing happened to me, and because of that X, Y, and Z. It was almost like, hey, this bad thing happened to me, and here's like all the good things I got out of it. And I mean, just I don't know, there's some life lesson there that you can take, but I think I said this on a pod, or maybe I was just thinking it, where bad things do happen, man. And if they haven't happened to you or someone you love, they will. And it's not an if, it's a when. And so I just encourage all of you to think about how you will react when bad things happen to you. When you're in those depths of despair, whether it's something real like cancer, or if it's an A2 poly, just check yourself and think about how you're going to react to that, because that's kind of how you define yourself over your life, because I guarantee you bad shit will happen. So make sure you figure out how to react.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try to open my mouth, because Josh is like a person that I go to for some, like life advice and stuff. So that was very well said. But yeah, I think Tristan is for sure someone that is inspiring, to say the least, and not exactly like obviously for cancer itself, right? But I think what we want to look at is underneath those details are his choices, his word choices, the thing, his value systems, and how those things changed for him, and how he decided to make those things different. Obviously, like, and I'm not trying to say that, anyway, I just think like we want to look beneath what it is for him, and I think that's why maybe he doesn't want to talk about it as much, because it's like, it's so easy just to say it's like cancer, and like, oh, he's inspiring because he survived cancer. And it's like, I think for me, the thing that was inspiring was a lot of the choices that he makes afterward, how he views life. And I think that's one way to talk about it in a way that honors, I think, how he views the experience.
Yeah,
but you're right. Bad shit just happens.
Yeah, go listen to that podcast we just did, number 49 with Tristan, to hear the words straight from his mouth. And with that, Tim, I'm going to click the check mark next to the talk about Tristan part of the podcast. And now we're entering into a new section, our announcement section. Yeah. It's new because I wrote it on our show notes. Yeah, we're now announcing things. We'll keep it short though. We teased this before, but Tim, we're launching a Patreon. And Patreon is a way for you all to support what we do, but it's not just it's not just for you guys to support us with money. We're also interested in letting you dive deeper into the things that you love to talk about. And I'd say that the really big thing that we're doing with the Patreon is setting up I guess we can call it an AMA, or Tim, I like when you called it like a classroom, basically something like a Zoom call where once a month we get together and we're going to go deeper on one of the topics that we talked about during the week. Stuff like that Do or Die podcast we did, where it was all about performing under pressure. We had a lot to say, and it was a long podcast, but let me tell you, there was some gems that me and Tim were not able to get into. And also it'd be fun to just have that time to get questions about that podcast. So, maybe you listened to it and something came up and you felt like we didn't really cover it, or you have a specific thing that you'd like covered. And so, having a classroom once a month where you can come in, ask us anything about that, hear us go more into it. Or maybe even we can get Tristan or whoever our guest was to come in, and if you want the beta for Jaws, Tristan's the guy to grill on that. So, Tim, that's coming in July. We said, right? July is when we're going to actually get that going.
That'll be our first classroom. Yeah.
So keep an ear out for that, our announcements. And actually the other announcement is, Tim, I made a little new website for the podcast. So of course we have testpiececlimbing.com, where you can go to, check out our coaches and book a session with us if you want to. But the podcast just became so big that we made a new website, and you can still go to testpiececlimbing.com and click the podcast, but it's also podcast.testpiece.climbing.com. And the two cool things I like in there is that there's this little icon in the bottom right that looks like a microphone, and you can leave us a voicemail there. And, you can ask us a question and we could like play it on air and answer it, or you can just say hi to us. I don't know. Something about that I thought was like, I guess it's kind of gimmicky, but I was like, this is cool. Like, I want people to like leave us voicemails. And you can also sign up for our newsletter on that website. And that's just a good way to hear about the upcoming guests, get the pro tips that we do straight to your inbox, and hear about these announcements, like when AMAs are going to happen and how to join us.
Dude, episode 50, kicking it off with some professional stuff, upgrades.
Episode 50, dude. Jeez.
Episode 50. Woo.
Yeah, I don't know what to. Yeah. That was our celebration, was adding an announcement section. Okay, Tim, you went to Japan. I want to talk about Japan. I also, the other thing that we have to do is our pro tip. So what do you think? Like, do we integrate the pro tip into Japan? Do you have a pro tip you want to start
I have a
out
pro
with?
tip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I have a pro tip. I mean, it's more of a simpler, just a pro tip for you guys. And more so because when I went to Japan, I didn't have this, and I very much regretted it. And I literally ordered one on Amazon today, like an hour ago. If you're serious about improving your climbing, invest in a phone tripod. You can be your best coach. You just need to learn how to analyze. Start with watching yourself climb a lot. I've said something like this before a million times, and I've probably told my clients, and I mean, for a lot of my coaching clients, I kind of force them to get a tripod because I'm in a Zoom session with them. But I film a lot. I film a lot of my climbing. I'm also a professional rock climber, so I have to post a lot of stuff, but it's hard to film on your phone without a proper tripod setup. I've gotten really good at using my shoes, my water bottles, with rocks nearby, but it's always suboptimal, and it's not very incentivizing to film. If you have a tripod, I think what makes it really nice is that it's just your routine. It's part of your thing to like set up, and before your attempts, you just like, that's one thing that I'm really good at, is like getting my phone set up before my attempts. But man, it's going to be so much more fun. I just got one. I think for me, I looked for one that had a pretty easy, Amazon has a lot of good options, but I looked for one that has an easy like on and off thing for your phone. Makes it easy, just like click it on and off. And then for me, I wanted the flexible legs so that if I was to go outside, it's easy to have like a rocky surface or whatever, and keep it that way. And it's also a shorter one. It's not a long standing one, so that it's more stable, I think. But
Yeah,
anyway,
which one did you get? Let's link to it in the show notes.
Oh, I got yeah, I'll send you a link for it, Josh.
Okay. Yeah, my buddy David Gurman, one of the founders of Kaya, when I go out and climb with him, he has a tripod, like a mega tripod. He was a photographer back in the day too, and he just sets up his phone and he just records the entire session. And I love it because then at the end of the session, I'm like, hey, could you clip out like my sends or we
That's
can like
perfect.
sit there and review it. It's great. Yeah. I mean, this is what I was saying on that podcast with Tristan. It's like everyone needs an 8A. Every pro climber needs an 8A. And if you didn't video it, you didn't send it, which isn't totally true. And don't take that too seriously. But video footage is awesome for learning about what success looks like for you and what's actually going wrong, so you can review it all along the way.
Yes, I just texted Josh the thing, so you guys will have it. But it's the Sensine phone tripod, the flexible cell phone holder.
Nice.
But I got you guys. I'll let you know how it is.
Okay, my pro tip does not require you to buy anything. It's just it's really simple. It's funny. We're talking about how it's all about skill. Strength isn't necessarily the best way to level up, but I kind of want to put a framework on the other side of that and say, I actually really encourage you to get really strong at some point in your life. Really strong in your pulling and your fingers. Tim has had that time when he was younger where he really got strong. Tristan talked about, Tristan was really, really strong, and I know he leveled up through his skill gains, but strength was still this undercurrent that he had there. And what I've noticed is as I get older, or if you get injured and have to come back, like I got shoulder surgery, what happens is if you were really, really strong, like, you had your 100 units of strength, like you were 100% strong at some point. And if you get hurt and you drop down to like 20 units of strength, it is so much easier to get to that 100 units of strength quickly than if you had been at, say, 90 and now you're pushing from like 90 to 100. It's just, maybe I shouldn't use 100 as like just this idea of the higher up you've pushed your ceiling at some point, the easier it is to get back to that ceiling, whether you've gotten surgery, been sick, with something really serious. And my hunch is that, someone like Tristan, who went through something super serious for like 6 months or a year, he can get back to his full strength way faster than you think. It's not like you start from scratch. I can talk about some of the physiological reasons, these things called satellite cells or neurological adaptation, but just know that although we're all about skill and that is how you get strong, especially if you're younger, it's not a terrible idea to just really get seriously strong at some point, and it will somehow kind of be with you for the rest of your life. At the very least, it will be easy to regain that strength at some point.
Yeah, man, I can't echo that enough. When I was getting started into climbing, obviously I had a thought, because I was competing a lot, and something that I really thought as a kid was, this is a skill sport, and if I can get really, really good at this, I can be really, really good at this. I also had this like Kobe mentality where, I really thought if I worked harder than everybody else by a lot, that I would never be, able to get caught up. So I was testing both sides of climbing. And the one thing that I learned from spending maybe 4 to 5 solid years of training my ass off, like training my utter ass off, usually 2 to 3 workouts a day, very rarely rest days, lots and lots of different workout routines, was just, first of all, it was really easy to follow the discipline if it was written for me. Like I would write down a lot of my training stuff and I would just check the numbers, like no excuses. Like you wrote the numbers down, so follow the numbers, right? And I would write ridiculous numbers that looked impossible, but then I usually do them in terms of my workouts and, die at night and then be like, wake up and be like, do it again. And I got really strong. And one thing that it taught me was I wasn't able to make excuses very much anymore. I think that's like a really key thing that every person, I think, in life should learn at a certain point is we always are going to make excuses, but having that perspective checked, one day is really important. One day being like, if we're constantly like, oh, my fingers are too weak. Oh, I'm not strong enough to do this. Something X, Y, Z. And then we test that. And then you realize sometimes the only way to prove that to somebody is by having them do it themselves, right? Proving it to themselves. Sometimes I can only tell you so much, like, you can do that move. 100% you can do that move. And someone's like, nah, right? It's like, why don't you believe me? And obviously I know a lot about climbing. And sometimes people are like, no, I can't do the move, right? Sometimes they'll do the move and they are proven that way, or they'll get really strong and realize that that's not going to get them to do a certain move either. And that checking that excuse, I think, just by doing the work is sometimes going to be the only way you check that excuse. So I can't double back on that enough.
Do the work.
Do the work.
Do the work.
Yeah.
All right, Tim, those are all of our pre-sections before we get into
talk about
the main focus of the topic, Japan.
Japan.
The it's funny because it's like, I was like thinking about it and I thought of it as the pilgrimage, the ultimate destination for the indoor climber is B Pump in Japan, in Tokyo. My buddy Ryan Olson went there, not to just climb, but I remember when he went there, he just said it was so good, and he really encouraged me to make that pilgrimage. That was really, really fun. So overrated, underrated, what do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I think that the title is going to be, why is B Pump the best climbing gym in the world? And my immediate answer to Josh and, to anybody who will ask me is that it's not. It is not the best climbing gym in the world. I'm going to start by saying that, but I'll also start by saying that it was incredible. And I had a blast, and it was amazing for a lot of different reasons that we're going to go into in a second. But it's funny. It's funny that B Pump is this like Mecca pilgrimage thing, like Bishop or Fontainebleau or any specific areas in climbing. It's like B Pump is now a destination. And I'll start by saying that the trip was we did an 8-day trip with my girlfriend Michaela and her family. It was kind of like a graduation gift trip for her, and it was a family trip. And the trip, we did a bunch of different things in Japan, but it was kind of designed around going to the climbing gyms and just hanging out. So we went to B Pump. We started off by going to de-bouldering plus lead in Osaka. That was the first climbing gym experience we had in Japan. And then 2 days later, we went to B Pump Ogikubo. And then we went to B Pump Ogikubo again. And then we went to B Pump Ogikubo again. And then we went to Rocky in Shinjuku. So we went to 3 different climbing gyms, but we went to B Pump 3 times. And I was sick the entire trip. We were all sick the entire trip. It kind of sucked. And I was really, really, really tired that whole trip. But I think I had a pretty good experience. And I just spent a lot of time climbing all the grades, a lot of different wall angles, styles. I don't know how my skin wasn't bleeding by the end. I was trying super hard. But my goal also, I'll share, my goal was to send a black tape. Obviously, everyone wants to send a black tape at B Pump. I sent a black tape at de-bouldering, and I sent a gray tape, which is the next grade up from black, at Rocky, which I was really stoked about. It seemed like it was honestly probably the hardest climb I did in Japan. But it was obvious that their grade scales were very different. That was for me, like one of the cons was that they used a similar grade tape, like the color system was the same, almost the same at each gym, but the grades were very, very far off. But I think it seemed like a consensus there. Like they just kind of knew that, because I asked one of my friends that I was climbing with, and he was like, people just know like the B Pump grades and these other grades are different. Um,
This
what
is
else?
a dumb question, but is the black tape the highest because it's like a black belt? Is that like
Oh,
in
I wonder what the colors come from, but I don't think that's true because it went black, then green, which I think is a pretty low belt.
I really have no idea. I just like, and maybe I'm
Yeah.
like, I could be like, yeah, this maybe is just like totally out of left field because I don't know like where karate originates and like there could be like a Chinese thing there instead of Japanese, but that was just like I was like, is it because it's a black belt? But yeah,
Maybe the black itself, I would assume that, has some correlation to like just black being like absolute mastery. But I have no idea, and I don't think it is because the next color is down. But anyway, my goal was to send a black tape. Did not happen. I didn't even try one actually. I actually never tried one just because they looked so hard, and the greens were all impossible for me. Like all the green tapes that were I
you
was
made this
trying.
comment, and I think you made it in the last pod, but I kind of wanted to dig into it where you said that the black tape you thought I'm going to say at B pump, not the other ones, were like maybe V15, and the thing that
Mhm.
stood out in my to me in that is that I know you and me when we go into a gym, well, maybe old me or younger me, I should say, like kind of like I would try to like flash everything that was hard. You're like, okay, like I might be able to flash anything in the gym. But you kind of pointed out that maybe that wasn't the mentality there, that that climb was so hard. It wasn't like, hey, this is just tricky and really hard. And maybe like if you're Tomoa, you can flash. It was like, no, let's put something hard on the wall, like actually difficult that theoretically maybe no one could flash, which
Yeah.
I thought was interesting.
Theoretically, maybe no one can do. I think that's what they're
Wow.
trying to get done is like have climbs that no one's going to do. And that's like I've said this so many times before in person to route setters, to gym owners here, just to my friends. Like, um, there is this woe is me concept that I almost makes it taboo for me to talk about, but it's like I want harder climbs at the gym, man. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm never gonna stop making this argument. Like my experience and a lot of other climbers' experiences are just not the same, right? Like a lot of professional climbers will go into climbing gyms and just be immediately underwhelmed because it's like, how many challenges do I actually have, and how many true challenges do I have in this gym? And I can use that word specifically, challenges, not just hard problems, but challenges. Like I could have a challenge at V5 and have an enjoyable experience, right? But there just aren't that many challenges for me at a lot of climbing gyms that I go to, and that's really underwhelming. I mean, a huge part of my climbing gym experience since day one was being like, wow, everything's impossible, and I have to learn my steps and learn this mastery. And I think Americans made this mistake, or not just Americans, but a lot of other gym societies made this mistake where they thought that once you got to a certain place, you weren't supposed to have that experience anymore. Like, oh, you climb V10, like, yeah, you're supposed to look at climbing and be like, I can do it all. I'm gonna tell you right now, I went to B pump and I was immediately like, oh, I remember, I can't do all the climbing. Like no matter what grade it is, I don't know how to climb perfectly every time on the wall. For some reason, American gyms that I've climbed at have made me, create this myth that I can do everything in climbing. And it's like, I don't want that. I don't
Well,
want that.
I think part of that is kind of what we alluded to earlier, where strong setters don't like setting easy climbs, and so
Mm-hmm.
I, like sometimes I'll have that idea where I'll be getting back into climbing after a hiatus, and I'll think to myself, I need to just go climb everything, and I'll climb, the V4 slab, and like I'll get on it, and I'll just think like this just yes, it's V4, but it's not like interesting and fun and difficult or testing me. It's not challenging. It's like, oh, well, I'm just going to grab, like, I'm way stronger than this climb, and I literally can just grab this one to hold and yard on it. And I'd have to almost trick myself into making it fun, which is not something I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And it's actually one of the things that stood out to me in Fontainebleau. Have you ever been there, Tim?
Mm.
So Font is mind blowing, where you will climb on V1 or V2, and it really is V1 or V2, but you actually have to do the sequence, and it actually is a little insecure. And you can't just say like, well, yes, it's V1 if you went like this, but I'm just going to, do a one arm pull up, which is easy for me, and skip it. And I think that, what I'm hearing, or I'm hoping I'm hearing from you, is that there's some care put into all the grades, so you're enjoying the journey no matter what the grade.
Yeah, I made that point later when I'm talking about the setting in my notes, but that experience that pretty much everybody who tells me about Fontainebleau, where it's like, oh, I mean, even on like V1s, V2s, like you can be a V15 climber and still fall on those things, and it's like, yeah, I mean, the number grade doesn't necessarily reflect how many tries it's going to take you. It's just once you do it, the difficulty of what it actually is based on certain factors. And I think that's what Japanese gyms, the all of my notes basically allude to saying that Japanese gyms just like care about all the factors that I think are relevant in climbing. But anyway, before we get far that way, I'm going to share my experience. So I didn't end up doing a black tag. I didn't end up even trying one. I grabbed a lot of the holes, but I was like, the one black tag that was set in the main area of the gym was really, really tweaky. It was like a very big dead point to like this iron cross shoulder move. And that usually just shoots my shoulder right away. And I didn't have any interest in like destroying my shoulder for me knowing I was going to try probably, 2 full days worth of climbing at least. After that, I was like, I'm just not going to like destroy myself on this move. But the rest of it looked honestly very doable over, a couple of sessions. I think I can do a black tag eventually. Just like I was not going to invest the time in one. The green tags to me felt, they looked and felt a lot harder than a lot of the green tags that I had seen in like videos previously. Green tags, I think, are in between like V12 and V14, but these all felt like at the very top range. So unfortunately, and that's going to be my excuse, man. I'm sorry. I thought I couldn't do a green tag because they were all really hard. I think, no, obviously the green tags were very hard for me. I was very close to doing one, but that was the softest in the gym. And I was like, this just feels harder than a lot of green tags that I've seen in the past. But I mean, don't get me wrong. The green tags always look very, very hard, but still climbs that I think I can do. And then the brown tag was the next grade and I did one. And so there were a couple other brown tags that I was pretty close on doing right away, but it's hard to like, get stoked on one thing. And then you're like, I got to try a bunch of different problems because I'm only here for, 3 sessions. And then you don't want to, and then you get really tired doing 20 different problems. And then you're like, I'm not going to invest in this super hard problem. But I ended up doing one like kind of comp dyno thing. And it was super hard for me. Took me 2 full sessions basically to do it. So yeah, that was my kind of experience in terms of like my climbing in the grades. I did a bunch of like orange and down basically, which orange I think translated to like, my friend told me it was like V6, but orange for me felt like V10, V11 for all those grades. And then the browns were like V11 to V13, I would say. They were close ranges, but.
So was there a lot of those green tags and black tags? And just kind of curious if there was, more hard climbing in general rather than just like one, it's like, oh, look at this like one super hard climb that no one actually gets on. Or was there like a decent amount of, V10 and up, like compared to, I guess, yeah, like compared to a normal gym in a large city, do you feel like the average grade was higher or the same? Does that question make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I felt like the grade spread was much more, it wasn't a bell curve where like most American climbing gyms are a very extreme bell curve where like, and maybe the first part of the bell curve starts a little bit higher where there's like, a decent amounts of like 1s to 3s. And there's the most like V4s to V7s in most gyms. And then there's like, it drops off again, like V8 plus, but it felt like there was no bell curve as much at this gym, except there was obviously a drop off towards the top end. Where like it felt like the more consistent grades were in the middle end and like the easy end, but there was still a decent amount of like orange or brown. And I think it's because orange or brown are so hard. It's like, that's okay. There's a lot of orange and brown, and then there's not that many greens or blacks. There's 2 black tags in the gym, and then there was 3 green tags in the gym, I think. But it's a small gym, so that's actually quite a bit of climbs that are impossible. Like you will not see climbers send these things. That's the grade of this gym. If you do, it's the one try of the day of one day of the week that Yoshiyuki or Sorato or Tomo or somebody sent a green tag, or Jung Won-chun came in and sent a green tag. Like you just don't see these grades sent very often. So, it is hard to justify having them.
How cool is it that they have them though? I mean, like, we've talked about this because I think actually I'll just use that to ask this question. When you saw the other people climbing, this can just be in B pump, but maybe also B pumping compared to some of the other gyms you went to. What's the average ability of the climber there? Like, in comparison to what I guess we're used to.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think like this is hard to explain, but I could tell that the climbers were better. For sure. But the average sending grade is like the same as it is here, which is a wide variety, right? Like I saw climbers climbing up to, I was climbing with one of my friends, Utah, who's like pretty strong. But other than that, our first session at B Pump, Yoshiyuki walked in the elevator like at the same time as we did. So I was like, all right, well, yeah, there's Yoshiyuki. He just got back from Salt Lake City. I did, but he's kind of like, he didn't I met him before, but he didn't remember me, and it was just kind of awkward because he doesn't speak like great English. So I just didn't say much more. I was like, "Oh, it's Yoshiyuki," and he was like, "Yes," and like didn't say anything else. And I was like, "All right, whatever, man. You're not gonna try to talk, but whatever."
Did you watch?
And then
Sorry, I got interrupted because did you watch
yeah,
that flat hold video that
I
they
didn't
did
actually with him and
Yoshi
Yanya.
and Yanya? Okay, I won't go into it, but
Okay,
kind of cool. There's this clip. I don't know if I sent it to you, but there's this clip of him doing this dino like to a one-handed crimp. And he's just like Supermaning out, and you know when you just see those moves, you're like, oh man, that's a tier 1 climber. That's
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, dude, Yoshiyuki is like, okay, so that session, it was pretty busy, just that first session, because we went in the evening, and Yoshiyuki walked in the elevator, we checked in, like started climbing, and I recognized probably like 6 plus more World Cup climbers, like on the Japanese team that I'd seen compete in World Cups or high level events. And I mean, Yoshiyuki is by far the strongest out of any of them, like strongest, you know, like he's for sure on the climbing wall. He's like clearly the one able to do like the hardest moves. But I was like, man, the caliber is just insane. And I actually ran into my friend Kaito, who I competed with in Canada before, and he's a setter at B Pump. I didn't know that. But like he was, when I was watching him climb, like next to the other guys, like no shade to Kaito, he's extremely strong, but I was like, there's a level difference that I'm watching, and that is absurd. But just to tell you, like there was a new set, and Yoshiyuki wasn't even remotely close on this green tag. Like I do think these climbs are done like over many sessions that these guys try. But yeah, anyway,
really
the setting style lends itself to just,
That's really
dude.
interesting though. Like I want to hear more about like the setting style, and I just that is I guess the whole reason why we're talking about this is hearing about Japan and what makes it special. And this to me is a really big difference that I didn't know about, to be honest. Was just that there are climbs that are really difficult and that people work on and try to achieve over time. That's just not what happens in the climbing gym. Like occasionally I remember we'd set like a V13, maybe a V14, and then literally it would just be kind of like the setters kind of the way we kind of sneak it by, I feel like, is that the stand would be like V10 or V11, then we'd like put a sit on at like V13, and people, not many people would get on it. But then, although sometimes we'd hear it through the grapevine, like, oh, this person was trying it. And
Right.
that's different. It's a different mentality to say like, here's hard climbs and they're going to get sent by some of the best, but it's going to take the whole time. And that's cool.
The biggest question mark there is why, right? Like I get asked so many times, even before I went to Japan, like, why are Japanese climbers better? Why do they compete better? Why are they, it's like, it must be in their culture, must be in the rice, must be, in something. I'm like,
the rice. I've never heard that one.
Dude, a lot of people have said that. They're like, it must be in the rice. It's like, no, dude, I eat a lot of rice too. Yeah. Come on, man. I'm like, I'm not Japanese, but I'm, I eat a lot of rice. Come on. But it's two things in my opinion. I'll just say it's obviously impossible to state this as an objective, but as a fact. But my opinion are two things. Their culture is in this way, like their lifestyle, growing up as a person, as a kid, and you see it like on the trains. You see like business people, older people. It's like retirement's never a thing there, and people are just way overworked. Like there's no excuses in this society. Period. It's in their lifestyle. There's like in their culture, in their work culture, in their family culture, there's no excuses, right? So when that translates to a sport like climbing, where we have constant adaptations on the wall, constant deviations, especially in setting, like we cater to feedback from climbers at the gym. And here's the two main factors I think what makes Japanese climbers consistently better is their culture of no excuses and the setting style maintaining the integrity of what hard climbing should be in the climbing gyms, which is exactly what you had just said, where it's interesting to watch climbers or hear about climbers in the gym constantly working with problems. Like, isn't that what climbing is? Isn't that what got us like hooked and addicted to climbing, was the fact that we would go, and for some reason in American culture, it's just done outside, right? Why? Because the setting doesn't respond to that well in the gyms, but it does in Japanese gyms. And it's because the members can constantly live up to that expectation from the setters, where the setters say, I wrote down a bunch of factors that I think make Japanese setting different. I'll go into it in a second. But here are all the factors that route setters say are important for teaching you in climbing, testing you in climbing. And the Japanese climbers, I just don't think often are like, that one was too reachy, this hold was too bad, like this foot was whatever. And like, whether you like it or not, setters in American gyms listen to that. I was a setter for a couple of years, and Josh knows this too. Like, we had to mold to that because, you know, gyms would tell you like, well, I've been hearing this response and this is what we have to do to our setting. And it's
Dude,
like, I don't want to do that.
doesn't this make you think of what Carlo was talking about, where there's like that struggle of solving a problem, and that sometimes that isn't what people want. You know, they want to take their kids to the birthday party, or, you know, or just top out that climb. And you know, Carlo argued that you could kind of actually have both in a way. Like, you could have like embrace that struggle of solving the problem and still make it fun. And actually, I was talking to a guy, I'm blanking on his name, but I found it really interesting, where he had set up a camera after a set and just videotape people on a new set, and then use that to get feedback of what people enjoyed. And I guess the point is that you can still make problems fun and interesting while still providing challenge. And he talked about how what people didn't like was like an unbelievably crux first move, right? Like, it's like, oh my God, I can't even pull my butt off the ground. And what they liked was kind of like, as like maybe each move got a little bit harder. And so, you know, it's like you're getting closer and closer to the top. You feel like you're making progress. I remember Carlo talking about that feeling of making progress is still there, even if you maybe didn't latch the hold, or you didn't top it. And I also want to echo what you're saying about Japanese culture, where, you know, I'm not Japanese. I do not know a ton about their culture. I've never been. So take this with a grain of salt, or a grain of
same
rice.
here, obviously. Yeah.
You like that? Really bad. It's a dad joke.
Dad joke.
But I will say that there is a stereotype of mastery there, right? Like have you ever seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi? That movie? Oh, dude. I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix, but it's about this like the best sushi restaurant in the world, and it's like in a Subway or something, and you spend like 10 years like learning how to make rice. Like, it's just like learning how to make rice, and the point being that the stereotype seems to be that the Japanese are willing to really dedicate themselves towards mastery of a single thing, and no big surprise, that gets results. And it is something that I wanted to ask you about. And you can see me ask a little bit about like, what's the average, you know, ability of climber? I'm kind of curious, like, what's the average age? Like, what's the body type? Because there is an element where it seems like the Japanese are typically, you know, leaner, more muscular, or I would say, just in comparison to Americans, probably less overweight. And yeah, just, I don't know, we can go whichever direction we want, whether it's setting or whatever jumped out at you, but those are some of the things I still wanted to hear about. We're kind of like, what does the average climber look like?
Yeah. And I do think this is an important disclaimer to make about these all being generalizations, right? Like, we have our own thoughts and assumptions about the culture, and, you know, but at the end of the day, it's all going to be a generalization. So do take everything with a grain of rice. But we had a dinner with Michaela's dad is a very successful person in the tech world. I'll just say it without going too much into detail. And one of his the people he's been working with for the past like long time lived in Japan. His name was Ande-san, and wanted to take us out for dinner. And oh, by the way, we ended up going to this yakitori place in Tokyo, and it was like in this yakitori is like barbecue, like skewered barbecue. And he said it was hands down the best yakitori he's ever had, and he'd been going for like 15 years. And it was just by far the best yakitori I think I would have ever had. And it was just in this little alleyway. I would never be able to tell you exactly where it is, and just like had no signs, no restaurant or anything. Like, you wouldn't be able to tell. It was so awesome. But we had a conversation with him, and we were talking about that part of culture, and, you know, me pointing out, we were talking about rock climbing a little bit, because he was like, why are you guys here and all this stuff? And he's like, what, you guys just came for rock climbing, for the climbing gyms? Like, that's kind of insane. Of course, you know, every regular person would think. But, you know, and then I started showing him like videos, and he was like, wow, like, he's like, so what makes Japan special? And I was like, best climbers are here, best climbing gyms are here. And he's like, why? And I was like, it's probably, I was going to ask you the same thing. Like, why do you think? And he was like, you know, I think growing up for me, I always had this thing where if something was hard, like if something in life was hard, I would always be told like, yes, it's hard, but there's a better way. And I was like, wow, that is like the climbing motto, right? For the best climbers ever. If something is hard, it's like, yes, it is hard, but there is a better way. There's always a better way. Even if there's not, you need to have this mentality, as people, as climbers, that, okay, this is difficult, but there's for sure a better way. And I need to make sure that I'm finding that better way, regardless of how it feels, regardless of how, hard it is, or like what it makes me feel like. I have to look for the better way. And then we just had our conversation, and walking back, to our place, I was talking to Michaela's dad, and I was like, it's really interesting. And I've learned over time that we're kind of on the opposite end of that, where we're looking for easy access, and our society is a lot more about easy access and quicker access, and, honestly, like the cheat code ways. And something that I've personally learned in climbing is that, I think the best climbers are people who are in between both of those things, right? In between the balance of, not making excuses, and, always understanding and acknowledging that there is a better way, but also looking for the easiest way out and being smart about it. And, I think obviously my point here is that there is also a generalization, though. It's not that every Japanese person or climber lives in this way. And it's not that every American person or climber lives in the opposite way or anything, but it seems to be more widely accepted, and it works really well for all the choices that they make in terms of their facilities, in their learning style, and like what they decide to do. And I hope that answer kind of
yeah, dude, it's really interesting. It's interesting because there is something about climbing where you are trying to do the hardest thing the easiest way, right? It's always like this focus on embracing the hard, yet trying to find the easiest way through it. And I think this is it again makes me think of this kind of trend towards training, like with these metrics that are so easy to get higher, that don't quite embrace the real hardness. Like, it's so enticing to show up and hangboard and not, you're not really stretching your brain. And like, it's funny because this is one of the things that we've harped on, like, yeah, Tim, you can write some PDF of a hangboard protocol, and people think that, like, if they just show up each time that, and they check those boxes, that they get stronger. But and this is not to say that training's bad. What actually makes me think of is Dave McLeod, who I just love, and I think I talk about a lot on here. People will ask him, what's the best hangboard protocol? And what he's shown is that the literature is not as settled as you think, where it's like, okay, you need like 5 sets of 5 reps at 80% or whatever. He's talked about some of his best hangboard gains have been when he just did it every single day. And he just like tried really hard. And then he's also had results where he didn't go every day or hardly ever went. But the point is that he was really trying hard. And so I guess what I'm trying to say there is that it's enticing to do these things where you can check the box. You're like, okay, I checked the box, but it goes back to intention. Like, did you show up with the intention of really getting better in that moment? And that's where I would argue hangboard gains can really come from too, is like, you're like, no, I am here. I am putting my all into this little 5-second burst, not just to check the box. And that's why sometimes when I do my workouts, I don't complete my workout. I come to the workout with the intention to have a great workout. And sometimes that's 2 sets, sometimes it's 10. But I know when I've met that threshold. And so, when I think about being a great climber and learning the skill, it's about showing up and really trying, embracing the hard, and maybe finding your easiest way through it, but embracing that hard and then rising to the challenge.
Yeah, that was so good. I think there's so many good things that you just said there. And, I kind of circle that out by saying that periodization, I think, is a really underutilized tool in like performance, like peak performance. But other than periodization, I just don't think that training, obviously we shouldn't put that much weight on consistent training as being like the end all be all for like our routine for the day. What we should be seeking is the one thing that you had said is stretching our brains, right? Stretching our brains can be in the workouts. It can be like trying hard on the hangboard thing is more important than just doing the hangboard thing. But also like the thing that I was saying where like, I walk into climbing gyms nowadays and I instantly am like underwhelmed, and I walk straight to the kilter board or the moon board. Why? Because that for me is the easiest access to like the feeling of growth, because the gym won't do it for me. And yeah, I'm going to put a ton of weight and responsibility on gym owners, gym designers, route setters, people the GMs who pick the holds for the climbing gyms. Like, those are all the factors that affect my experience at the climbing gym and entice me to want to stretch my brain or not. Well, yeah, you and I are sitting here saying the importance of stretching your brain and like the training is, but it's like, dude, to be frank, like climbing gyms in Japan don't have workout areas. They don't have hangboards, like a lot of them don't, right? Like they have put an emphasis on the climbing, and the setting is by far the best setting I'd ever seen. So it's like, what are you enticed to do? You're just enticed to go and rock climb and solve on these hard problems that you cannot do, even though they're V4. You just have to sit there and repeat and repeat and repeat and teach yourself, right? And that's the culture. Now, I wish there was a hangboard at the climbing gyms in Japan. But
I literally had that question, like, is there a training area? And all the things you're speaking about really, again, make me think of what Carlo was saying about the boulder field and focusing on the setting. And I thought we should dive deeper into that. What about the holds that they use? What was the setting like? What were the volumes like? Were they reachy, not reachy? Just can we go more into the setting, and you can just geek out as a setter and as a climber?
Yeah, let me give you like an analysis of the climbing gyms as a whole, and then it'll just like go into the setting, because I think there's a lot of like really bare bones analysis to give, just for those of you who are more curious. It is a perfect bouldering gym. Period. B Pump Ogikubo, in my opinion, is a perfect bouldering gym. Because it's a small gym, but it has a near perfect layout. I think a layout is very important. It's got every angle you need. It's got open spaces in between the walls for viewing and for sitting and for hanging out. And on either end, when there's two walls facing each other, you want to make sure that that space is open enough, and it totally is there, which is really nice. The basic amenities are nailed. The store is really nice. It's actually probably the nicest climbing store I've ever seen in a climbing gym. All the shoes, all the pads, all the stuff. Like, they clearly are climbers and they get it, which is, you go into some climbing gym stores and you're like, y'all aren't climbers. Like, you guys don't know what I actually want to buy. The grade sheets are pretty much everywhere. So you can see, even though the grading, like for me, all I look at, because I can't understand the text on there, and not like the grades, the numbers are anything that I care about, but the colors are nice to see, right? It's like, okay, I just did a white. What's the next grade? So those are on all four corners of the gym, which is really nice. Super underrated. If you have a circuit grading gym, like, I don't know how many times I've been around and walking around, been like, where the hell is the grade sheet? Like, I gotta, see, and there's only like two. Like, what is going on there? The bathrooms are nice. There's vending machines literally everywhere in Japan, but there's vending machines in these gyms, which is super nice. Lighting is great, and there's a near perfect spray wall. The only reason why I say it's near is because, in my opinion, there weren't good enough holds on the wall, but it's hard to have good enough holds on the wall. But it's better to have a lot of bad holds than a lot of good holds on the spray wall, right? I'm gonna go past setting and go in. Okay, I'll just talk about setting. I said this is where the gym could be considered the best, just the setting, because I think it's obviously missing a lot of things. Like I said, the training area, and we won't go too deep into that right now. But here are the notes. I'm just going to read them straight through. So the setting is teaching yet entertaining. I think it's really easy to just do teaching things in whatever movement that you're doing, but a balance of making sure that it's entertaining is still really good. How is it entertaining? I think exactly what Josh was going into, where people don't like cruxy things very much, right? Like, I like cruxy things far beneath the grade that I'm able to climb, because it allows me to just execute. But when I'm trying to solve something, which is the vast majority of most of my climbing sessions, especially in a small gym, you're not going to like, if that was your main gym, you would run out of stuff to do very quickly if everything was cruxy, because you would only be sending the things that you can send, and then you're very far away from the things that you can't send.
Quick note on what cruxy means. Cruxy in general is thought of as like it's one move that is all the difficulty in a climb, right? It just is like, it's the move that showcases all the difficulty. So it's like, this is V2 to a V6 move to V2. And so it's a V6, but it feels like a V2 with one weird move. And what I want to point out is that when climbs are a good kind of quote unquote cruxy, or I think you'll see this in quote unquote test pieces outside, is when it's a really unique, weird move, but when you execute it perfectly, it actually isn't that more difficult. Like that move isn't that much more difficult, and just demands like a new skill set. And the reason why I said that is because you talked about how if it's a much lower grade for you, how sometimes, it can be kind of fun to just execute on the crux. But what I would argue is that in good setting, when you do that, it's like, oh, this is a skill in your wheelhouse, and you can actually make it that quote unquote crux just the same difficulty as the rest of the climb. And It's just a
Yeah.
subtle difference there. Like, how does it feel versus what it actually is? The objective versus subjective
Yeah,
grading
and
there.
I think something that you're, mentioning is the factors of what makes something a crux, on a good route, a good boulder, a good climb. And by the way, this isn't accomplished by a lot of rock climbs. Like, it's not just that you go out rock climbing and everything has a great crux. No, I've done a bunch of rock climbs that I've graded 1 or 2 stars just because the cruxes are on the grade of the overall climb just stand out as like, now the factor of difficulty for this one crux move is simply that I have to grab this shit hold and do this big move. Where I think the thing that they do really well in Japanese setting and a lot of good setting that I've seen, all around the world so far that I've climbed in, is that when cruxes appear, there is a way to solve the crux, not just through grabbing a hold harder or jumping harder to a hold. That's really the factor here. And so a couple of things that I said about setting are that it's fair. It was a big thing, and Michaela could do, at least try or look like she could progress on anything that was very hard for her. And she's 5 foot with a 0, and like that's a pretty small climber. And like, yeah, she just goes around to a lot of gyms, and I'll just have to be like, babe, you just can't do that climb.
How did they do it? I think it's interesting that you use the word fair, and we're talking about like kind of like, yeah, what do you mean by that, and how was it accomplished?
Here, I'll say that it felt unfair for me. Like a lot of the setting felt almost like too scrunchy, or like the boxes felt kind of weird, like maybe the least optimal to generate, like my hips stuck out a lot of positions. But that's how I want to climb in gyms, because I know that I'm a taller climber than most of the people. Most gyms and most board climbs fit me perfectly. I am not the number one demographic. My size is not the number one demographic of rock climbers. So it should be that I feel a little bit too big for every box, in my opinion. And I felt just a little bit too big for every single box that was in these gyms. But also, like, if you did a reaching move, you had an option to accomplish that reaching move. And the hand reaches were capped at like 5 feet for, most of the climbs. I would say some hard climbs maybe weren't. And that's a lot longer than you would think. Like most climbers are almost never climbing at peak reach. Like, just go climb at the gym and you're almost never climbing at peak reach. So
when I would set, I would do the thing where you, yeah, look for your elbow. Tim's showing me his elbow where you find out, like, you do your max span and then you just go to where your elbow is. Okay. I want to dig into this a little bit more, because I think it's really interesting when we're talking about fair and cruxes. I'm curious, did you feel like the setting only had one way, or did you feel like there was multiple ways to solve quote unquote cruxes, or all moves? There's this different kind of style in climbing, or I should say in setting, where maybe more in my era, I would say that, especially with sands, volumes, or big holds, it was like, this is a right hand hold, that's a left hand hold, you're not going to match, you're not going to drop knee, this is a heel hook, and this is the correct beta. And maybe you could break it, but then you can just hear in that word, quote unquote, broken, meant like it almost implied it was wrong and there was a failure in the setting. Where some of the compier style stuff, when it's set well, it seems as though there's multiple ways through a climb there of equal difficulty. And I would argue that's some of the things that make outdoor sport climbs especially really good, where people all do it differently. It's all the same grade, and I love that. Yeah, can you speak to some of that setting, or how it was put into practice there?
I actually love this part of the gym experience, is that sometimes it was important to do the quote unquote intended beta, and a lot of the time it wasn't. And like, it was nice to have some climbs that were like very directly, clearly, like, quote unquote, we call them trainer boulders, where it's like, all right, there isn't that much of a sequence. They're just hard, and you just got to probably do it the most optimal way of climbing. That's kind of my personal way of climbing. If you watch me climb ever, it's like Tim climbs by the textbook of like, mechanics, right? And a lot of the time that worked for me there, and a lot of the time it didn't. And there were, 3 different betas that were completely different betas that for me all felt the same difficulty. It was just, maybe for me, I had to pick, my next 10 tries to invest in were kind of based on my perspective on the volatility, which is my favorite way of climbing. Is just like, all right, this way feels the same, this way feels the same, this way feels the same. Why am I picking one beta over the other? That's what teaches me opinions in climbing. That's what makes me a better or worse climber, is when I can pick those opinions on like what route.
Sorry, you said different levels of volatility. I just want you to explain what you mean there, both to me and to everyone else. But it's like if there's three different levels, or there's three different beta, and we'll just say they're theoretically all V8. Why? What does it mean that there's different levels of volatility, and why do you choose one over the other?
If I was a perfect rock climber, if I was a robot rock climber where I had the most ideal amount of strength, like strength wasn't an issue essentially, and like friction wasn't an issue, I would have zero volatility on all climbing movements, right? I would never fall. I would always be doing the optimal way because I was strong enough to. A lot of climbing isn't like that, right? Like we try boulders, we try routes, and like there are a lot of movements where we have kind of like our intuition and our instinct tells us like, if I use this foot in this position and this timing and this pulling, then this will be the easiest way to do the move. And a lot of the time you'll like try it and then be proven wrong or have to try it another way, or maybe feel like, but I also could do this and I could do this. And the volatility depends on, at that point, your specific level of strength. At that point, that is the only time that strength is actually relevant. If I was to do this beta with a heel hook and a left heel hook and a right toe, or a left toe hook and a right foot on the other side of a hold, like essentially the leverage is similar. It's very similar. And what you can do is also very similar. But the only difference is how good am I at toe hooking versus heel hooking? How good am I at holding this one hold this way with speed, or latching this hold with this much distance? For me, picking those things is solely dependent on my level of strength. And that takes a ton of awareness. And that just challenges you as a climber. I think at the core, that's what rock climbing is okay, you have your level of strength. You're trying this rock climb. Over tries or analysis or just like knowledge, you'll be able to know what the best beta for you is based on your level of strength or weakness. And you should just go for that way. And the climbs there were very close. Like the methods were all close when it came to feeling.
Yeah. What's interesting about this is this just shows how important tactics are, and understanding yourself and understanding where your strengths lie. And it made me think of this climb that Jumbo Love. I just watched Seb do Jumbo Love and then add that direct start. Shout out to
which is sick
beast Seb, just absolute beast. And he did the crux differently than Chris Sharma did. He did this kind of like really low percentage knee bar, but he said when it went well, it went really well. And I wonder if he probably could do it the other way. But then when he all of a sudden did that direct start, he was probably making this assessment where he's like, I'm going to be more tired. And this move is more risky and lower percentage when I knee bar, but it's going to allow me to arrive more tired. And, it's just interesting how you can start making these choices. You can say like, I'm actually going to overpower this move so that for the next move, I get my right hand in the right position where it's not the easiest way for me, but it helps me set up the next move. It's just, it's interesting how I was just talking to someone about this. I was rope climbing with them, and they're a little bit more on the lower end or more intermediate range. And I shared with them, I said, look, if there's going to be a hard right hand move coming up, or you're going to have to clip off of something off a right hand that's already pumped, give it an extra shake earlier at that rest. Like, give it a little more love before you set off. And it like blew their mind. But it's just like this is what good setting is where you have these different options. And now it's like, okay, how are you? And this is what good climbing is. Okay, how are you going to apply your efforts to get through that the best way?
Yeah, I think good setting can allow that learning teaching experience to happen, because I don't think that is the definition of good setting. I think good setting can be in this way that's black and white, like you just climb this fun route. But I think we lean way too hard that way in most of our setting. I'll make that claim. I think we should make an effort towards, and I think like I like climbing at Bouldering Project and Momentum because they do a really good job of that type of setting. Honestly, like coming back, I was like, actually I give these gyms a hard time. I think they actually do a pretty good job after just climbing at a gym where probably 80% of the style at this gym was that kind of ambiguous, like, all right, now it's not super clear for you. The factors of difficulty come from a different place. And to continue that thought, more setting analysis from my end.
I want to hear about the holds, dude. Don't skip.
I'll get to the holds. Okay. I'll get to the holds. Yeah, because setting for me is like, I kind of highlighted three very important factors that I think made a climbing gym really good, it's setting, holds, and layout. So I'll
Mm.
talk about the setting first entirely. Extremely diverse style, which is something that we just talked about. I think the style was just, like you kind of expected. Now, a lot of the holds, and we'll get there, were a lot of open-handed, a lot of slopey holds, like a lot more of them. Actually tweaked my finger like on the moonboard right before I went to Japan. And I was like, fuck, no way. My first time ever going to B pump. I'm not going to be in perfect shape, like yada, yada. And I was just climbing, and I didn't ever really like be like, oh man, my finger hurts, because I was just climbing on a bunch of slopers. And I was like, wow, like you don't have to, like your fingers aren't really going to get hurt, and they're probably going to feel healthier here because you're just climbing on so many slopey, pinchy holds. And of course there are crimps, but intentional crimps were there.
It's so funny because what's so enticing for me to do, and it's not really exactly me. I think it's the rest of the world. It's so enticing to be like, the Japanese are small and burly, like, and they crimp like champs, right? Like that's like, I feel like that's a really tempting thing that I would hear people say is like, you look at Tomo, he kind of looks like a little ball of muscle, like explosive and burly. And you look at some of those outdoor achievements. And actually it comes from some of the things where I would see the Japanese come and visit Bishop. And what they would do is they would often crush really crimpy test pieces in Bishop and then maybe not do the buttermilk, or you could just see like they would have this unbelievable finger power, but then you hear about what they're training and it's like, that's not what they're doing. And like, it's like, you want to say like they are strong fingers and naturally really strong. And instead you hear them like they're on slopers and heavily technical focused. And I just wanted to call that out.
The B pump sessions, that was the first time I had gone 3 days on in a row in the last couple of years. And it was easy. Like, being tired, traveling, jet lagged. And I was like, all right, let's go climb. All right, let's go climb. All right, let's go climb. Each one was a 4-hour session. It allows me to climb way more. I went to Momentum the first day back. Well, I came back and we drove to Vegas, and then we did the Tristan podcast. And then I drove back here and had my first session back at Momentum. Hour and a half in, I felt like my fingers were going to break. Like every climb that I want to do in the high end just had a bunch of crimps on it. And I was like, I literally have to stop my climbing session now, an hour and a half in, because I cannot climb anymore without feeling I'm going to hurt myself, even on easier climbs. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is so annoying, because in Japan, I could like have a recovery session, just go to the gym and just work a bunch of slopey moves and like probably not hurt myself. The one thing that I did feel though was like more elbow tendonitis. And I was like, I just did so much pulling because I could climb so much. I wasn't used to it. I had to do a bunch of push-ups afterwards, so I didn't get some, tennis elbow flaring. But here's one point I wanted to make also about the setting, which, again, we're talking about the holds that kind of led to this type of thing, but, and you're talking about the slopier holds leaning more towards this technical, like body positioning oriented climbing. And that's what they do with the setting. It's clearly leans towards testing these factors, in my opinion: commitment, body positioning, trust, derivative, and sustaining mechanics. So what do I mean by that? There's compromised launches. So if there was a dyno, it was never like a straightforward dyno. Like the feet would be kind of slopey, or like weird offsets. The holds would be facing one way, or the starting holds was just straight up not jugs, like maybe underclean crimps, sideways crimps, blocked holds. And, compromising those launches teaches you to derive better, right? If you are always handheld, for deriving your momentum, your drive, your power, right? This is a huge thing that I teach in climbing a lot, which is the first thing in climbing movements is the derivative of your movement, right? How do you create? If you don't know how to create for your climbing movements based on what you have, right? It's like, oh, well, I want to do this in my climbing movement, right? It's like, oh, I want to reach up this way. It's like, well, what do you have? And what is the best way to derive, right? Because sometimes it's different. The handholds aren't going to tell you exactly the best way to derive. It's probably going to be the footholds, or the lack of footholds, or the direction of the footholds. And that's something that they did really, really well, was they tested you on the derivative mechanics, and then the sustaining mechanics. So the sustaining mechanics, what I noticed was that footwork and like positions of handholds or footholds were intuitive, but they were like non-jug. So there was no jug escapes for cruxes. Like, it's like, oh, I'm like stuck here, I'm double Gastones, and oh, the finish hole's a jug, I can just jump for it. It's like, nah. If you had a hard position, you had to fight through that hard position through intuitive placements. Like the placements were exactly where you wanted them to be, but they were just hard. Like the holds were just bad. They were slippery. You know, they're facing like kind of hard ways and like a little bit more aggressive than you wanted them to be. So you had to fight through sequences more than just escape through sequences. And that's something that is super underrated in setting.
That's what good comp setting is often
Yes,
too,
yeah.
right? Where sometimes I was so guilty of this when I would set to like a dyno. You would just be like, okay, giant jug, big foot, go launch. Like it just all felt perfect. Like in fact, you would like move the feet around and you're like, okay, now this is perfect. And it totally would happen outdoors where you would see a move on a video and you go out and be like, oh, like I can do that move. And you'd find it. You'd go out there and you would be like, man, that foot's just like a little further away than I want it to be. Like it's like the foot's tweaked a little bit the wrong way. And it's just something that like you really need to understand and embrace. I think it happens in comps too, where maybe you watch it on TV and you think it's not that bad, but then you get there and you're like, no, this makes sense. Like this really is a dyno with these two crimps to that sloper, but everything's just a little weird. And I think that's really cool to hear that they do that. And then that you talked about, you called it sustained. I guess, I love that thing where it was one of the things I didn't like about gyms where they have jug top outs is, you know, you'd set something like really intricate and cool towards the top. And I was the kind of guy who could just always like launch for the top. Like it was a specialty of mine that I would say ends up hurting me. Right. Like, because
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I love hearing that it's like that. Yeah. No escape. I love that. You have to like, yeah, that's really cool. That's just good setting, man. It's just good setting is really.
Dude, I mean, like this is one thing that I was getting really frustrated, like climb a B pump over and over again, just like, you know, day on, day on, day on. And I was like, every day I was getting more frustrated with like American setting. I was like, what? Like, why do I have to fly across the world to learn, you know, that climbing gyms still possess this integrity of like what climbing is supposed to be, you know, and like, yes, I'm using a very direct claim and saying what climbing is supposed to be in climbing gyms for the best experience of a rock climber. I'm making that claim right now. And I think it's this teaching concept, this testing concept, like, and I think we go way too hard in testing very specific things. Like, can you grab this hold and can you jump to this hold? It's like, fuck, sure. Like, but that's for the spray wall, man. Like, you know, that's where we play with those, you know, what ifs. Can you do this? Like, not for testing, you know, 1,000 people or who are going to try this problem for the next 2 months, you know, like, so I think, yeah, I had something else to say there, but we're just going to move on. Handhold difficulty isn't considered a factor at grades as much. I just don't think they care very much about throwing a bad hold on a easier, you know, quote unquote easier climb, because they can maintain the integrity of that grade through the mechanics, through the options, through, you know, the size of movements or the angle. They just slapped bad footholds onto any grade imaginable. So when I was like warming up for stuff, I had to really pay attention. And I was actually falling on like quite a few like V4, V5 climbs, like still in my opinion, great afterward, like V4 climbs.
That's so cool to hear. For one thing, that's how outdoors actually works, right? You can be on a 510 and just find like a razor. But what's cool is it makes you think of exactly what I was saying earlier, where it keeps you interested instead of just give, like, if I'm on a V4 or V5 and I see a hold up there, I'm like, you know what? Like, I know that holds pretty good. I'm just going to jump and latch it. I'm just going to dead point and like, because I'm like, I'm going to grab it like it's a V13 hold and I'll just swing on one arm and it's a jug to me, but it's not for a V5. And it's just like, I love hearing that because that keeps you engaged. It means you actually have to climb it with mechanics. And yeah, I mean, dude, it's just, I'm shaking my head because what I hear is nothing magical. Like things we already know.
Nothing magical.
Right.
Yes.
Like, it's like, oh wait, like, let's not like, just allow people to jump through. Let's think about, you know, the integrity of, I like how you're saying integrity, because it's like preserving the beauty of movement across all grades. And I also love the idea of not letting people suck out of a position by just lerping for some jug that just, you know, cause that's not how it usually works in life. And also, sorry, I interrupt you. And also I'll tell you what, let's say you get good at, you know, making sure that you're not just lerping out of awkward positions to jugs. When the time comes and maybe you're outdoors and that is a jug, you'll do just fine. It's the way, it doesn't work the other way though. Like
Totally. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. Like, and that's, what you were mentioning, it's actually what I forgot to mention before was that, you and I are pretty good at like but the jug, the jug is right there. I can just, it's a huge move, but I'm for sure going to stick it if I get there, and getting there is pretty easy for me. And like the moon board and the kilter board, just like, that's what every climb is, and like, here's a hot take. The kilter board, man, if you drop the angle on that thing, you don't just add a grade. I'll just tell you that right now. You drop 5 degrees on the kilter board from 50 to 55, some climbs get easier. Like some movements, because it's more overhung, it's just, sometimes the factor of difficulty on a kilter board climb isn't the fact that it's overhung. It's just the size of the moves. And so when the climb gets more overhung, if the factor of difficulty for a move was never the footwork in the first place, then the climb doesn't get suddenly harder. Like it's just a little bit different. It's not harder.
Other hot take on the moon board is, I was just texting with my buddy about it, who's just kind of starting to do the V9s on there. And he's just kind of like, they're not so great. And I basically said to him, I said, yeah, moon board, maybe not good after V9 or even V8.
Yeah.
Like I'm
quality wise.
I would say actually though, better than those other boards for kind of lower grade, but it seems like the holds are just so positive that you can kind of just like jump between holds and latch them. And I was doing a bunch of like V10s. I was just like, I'm just like jumping and then catching thing with like 3-finger drag and just hanging it, and it's like,
yeah,
great. I mean, look, there's some different climbs in there that are good, and
I'm pay like we had a moonboard podcast and talked about the reason why you climb on the moonboard. Like there is a huge incentive to climb on the moonboard. It is solely for that reason, to get on the other side of good climbing. And like, sometimes we don't want to have to like, challenge ourselves in that way all the time, but it should be probably 20% of our climbing should be on the moonboard, and the rest of it should be the other way. And, lately in my climbing, it's been the other way around, where it's like 20% of my climbing is if I go to the climbing gym and I happen to see a boulder or a route that looks like a good challenge, then I'll try it. And the rest of my session will be on the boards. And that's just sad to me. But anyway, there's nothing bad about the moonboard. There's nothing wrong with it. But the integrity of climbing movements can be preserved in these ways. And climbing gyms in Japan tend to do that really well. And climbing gyms pretty much everywhere else struggle with it, is going to be the word that I use. But yes, going back to it, handhold difficulty is not considered a factor at grades as much. And at hard grades, they kind of don't care if you have a clear solution or not. Like if you have a really clear, obvious way of doing it or not, like, and often it's not on the green tags and the black tags. I was like, how would you, I guess it doesn't matter. Like they grab this hold and it's so bad. And usually in American setting, even on hard climbs, I'm like, there's a something to support that movement, but there it's like, seems possible, you should probably just try. And it's like, I love that where I'm like looking at this climb, I'm like, that doesn't really make any sense. I'm like, but actually if you grabbed it and you were insanely strong, impossibly strong, it's probably possible. But I like that no matter what, the holds are just bad. But B pump is going to be my last note on like setting. I guess this is more going into holds, but greasy as fuck, man. Greasy as fuck in a bad way. Like, like period. They just need new holds. Like I was shocked at how trafficked some of the holds were. And, like a lot of the footholds were like to the point where if you wash them, they would just never get any better, so glossy, like completely different grit level on some of the holds. And I was like, wow, like how did these get so bad? It's like, well, climbing gyms should cycle their holds like quite frequently just so that doesn't happen over time. And and I would say, unfortunately, I'd say this is just without an argument, a con of the gym. They should realize that the impact of a climber's experience from holds that greasy is pretty big. And unfortunately, it's a gym that has a huge reputation for being like the best. And like, no matter what, you're going to run into this factor of like your first experience climbing is not going to be the setting yet. It's going to be the holds, right? The first thing you grab is the holds, and then you have an analysis on the setting. And if the holds kind of right away, you're like, ugh, like greasy, like not so good. And like you step on a hold and you instantly slip on it. And that happens a lot there. I think like, they're almost taking that no excuses thing too far in that way. I'll just say that.
So you don't think that's like a feature, not a bug, like that? Like it's good for it to be worn down
Yeah.
and slippery. I'm
Yeah.
kind of joking, but not really. Like, I mean, maybe
Right.
You can make an argument, that's like good, but
Yeah. And I wrote that. I said literally the second part of my note was not a factor of setting that I think is ever relevant for growth, especially with the hold types that are out there nowadays. Like slopers are a great and solid teaching tool without needing to be greasy. I'll just say that. I think you can eliminate grease as a factor from all climbing gyms for the rest of climbing eternity. And my opinion is that we'll still be able to teach the things that people make the excuse for, protecting greasy holds.
I agree. And what I would say is that, people could argue here. They're like, oh, but then it's like less friction and it, requires you to do blah, blah, blah. But what I would say is that different holds are made with different levels of friction to teach different things. And so you can buy new holds that don't have as much grip, or you can even go and get dual techs. And you just, the goal there is that you have all of the options available to teach the thing you want to teach, not that everything is greasy and gross, but take that B-pump. You guys suck.
Fully worn out urethane is not good for rubber. It's like climbing on glass. You would almost never make a hold intentionally used for your feet out of glass, right? Why? Because you'll never have friction, right? So why, like, people are making all these dual techs feet climbs, and I'm like, why are we doing that? There's not a connection there that you can even you're literally putting a hold on the wall for like pure volatility, and pure volatility, in my opinion, is not the good type of volatility where it's like, well, you might just slip and you might just not. Like, that's not the factor that I want in my climbing.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of forced dual techs use personally.
Yeah. I had some notes.
No text. That's what it's
called. No text. Yeah. No text is not fun. I had a couple of notes, but they're a lot quicker for debouldering in Osaka and Rocky Shinjuku, because I might as well share. But I said very similar in setting factors, actually, which was really nice. Definitely underwhelming in terms of amenities and layout, but it felt like it didn't matter very much. Like, I still felt like my climbing gym experience, the integrity of my climbing gym experience was withheld, was still there because of the quality of setting and the holds that they had.
So you didn't miss the cortado and hot stone massage and yoga. I will say, don't get me wrong, I love me a good cortado, but
for sure. I mean, those amenities are like, almost extreme amenities. I just meant
I mean, also we're I was taking it to like the extreme, but we contrasted some of the stuff with the Boulder Field, which we talked to Carlo about why we thought it was a great gym, and Boulder Field does have that stuff, but it's like setting, climbing. We're a climbing gym, like climbing, and then the other stuff is nice, and so it's not like that stuff ever takes away from the experience. So please, gyms, keep putting in yoga rooms and weights and everything. I got nothing against it.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. And I said that, so this gym still had both of these gyms, in my opinion, had an ideal spread of angles. Like there was every angle, and it was nicely spread, but wall height was compromised on a lot of walls, and tighter spaces. There were a lot more, there were not very good viewing spaces. So that wasn't super enjoyable. And the spray walls weren't so good. And I don't think they had great hold spreads, but again, all that being said, like, if you don't pay attention to any of those things, it's not going to take away from your experience. And, including those experiences in gyms don't make a climbing gym experience better anyway, right? I'm still going to go to a climbing gym to climb. And if the climbing gym is amazing, but the climbing isn't amazing, I'll never go back to that gym ever again.
Amen.
Period. Yeah. Grades were all over the place. I kind of mentioned this before. Despite having a similar color layout across the country, I think the consensus at each climbing gym is very, very, very different. These gyms were much less trafficked and are made for nicer, gritty holds. And for me, that was actually a substantial part of the experience, unfortunately. And I could just be picky. Like, I could be super nitpicky about this stuff, but I think that is, and that's a very impactful part of your climbing experience. It's just the holds that you grab. Anything else that you wanted to make notes on the gyms?
One last question for you. I think you've already answered it, but it would just be, would you be a better climber if that's where you climbed all the time? And that's B-pump. And I mean, the kind of like side thing to that is, would the average American climber be better?
Yeah. So that's a great question. That was the very first. So my title for my notes was, what makes B-pump the world's best bouldering gym? And then my next note was, it's not, but I probably can become a better climber there than any other gym. So I'll say that I'll make a very direct claim here. My guess is that most people will go to B-pump and probably not instantly become a better climber. I think it allows you to become a better climber, right? by the way, I think a lot of climbing gyms in Josh's era were much more like B Pump with just older holds, right? But over time, I think PG was much more like B Pump in my earliest days of climbing. Like all the things that taught me to be a better rock climber were there, and all the things that I'm mentioning about B Pump that in the setting, what the setting possesses that actually challenges us in a good way and makes us better climbers, I think was there at Planet Granite a long time ago. It just wasn't so flashy and like new. And over time, what I noticed in my climbing experience at Planet Granite, which is now Movement, was that setting was told to be catered to a different audience. And for that reason, I think a lot of people would go to B Pump or climbing gyms in Japan and be almost like, I think if we have an approach of like going traveling to a climbing gym and we're like, it's not our home gym anymore, I don't think we're so critical. But if it's our home gym, it's like, fuck, I'm going to go every day and slip on this greasy, slopey V4 over and over again. It's like, you can think that, but you can also just try to overcome it. And if you pay attention to how you can overcome your climbing, then I think you'll be much more open to that. I just don't think most people are open to that right away and would almost need their hands held in a way because of our culture and our approach to difficulty.
I want to get Carlo's take on this stuff. Kind of curious. Just I'd love to get him back on and hear if he's been there and what he thinks, because there's just a lot of themes here that I'm hearing that are similar.
In our podcast, he mentioned that one thing that he's really proud of for his gym and their community is their communication, right? So the members and him could have feedback, right? Or the setters could have feedback with the members, and they can kind of like almost talk about the routes or the boulders and like why something is set up a certain way. And that allows climbers, I think, to be a little bit more open-minded about it versus like, well, I usually climb this this red grade, and this one I couldn't even get off the start of. And it's like, well, did you try this? And it's like, oh, I didn't try that. I might as well try this. Like that type of conversation, I think, is extremely valid and almost necessary in a culture that is pushing, climbing difficulty in modern ways. But anyway, I think, those are my key takeaways for my climbing gym experience in Japan coming back are that setting, holds, and gym layout are paramount when it comes to user experience. I think, if you care about a lot of other things, it's fine. I don't think it needs, it matters. But if you're going to claim to be a climbing gym, I really think that these factors should be highly, highly considered. I wrote, I go to the climbing gym for very few reasons, personally. Yet I only satiate my needs and desires at some gyms sometimes. And that's really sad. And our experience at the end of the day as gym climbers is guided by the actual movements on the wall. And personally, I just get bored of just climbing on the boards. And I'm getting bored of not teaching myself constantly every day. And I'm bored of walking away, not wanting to improve certain aspects of my climbing. And all of those things are done in those Japanese gyms. And it's obvious that Japanese gyms pay attention every single time, every set. There was not a set that fell off. And yeah, each set felt like it had a theme. The holds didn't crowd each other. The volume usage was, you asked a question about volume usage. The volume usage is thoughtful and intentional. And, it worked together on the wall really well. Like everything was thought out really well. And, as someone who's route set before, I can really notice those things.
Well, all those things you said can be included in all gyms, thoughtful setting and hold choice and intention behind the setting is not somehow exclusive to Japan. So hopefully, I don't know. I'm always optimistic. We had this kind of era of a boom in climbing gyms, like a money grab where it was just like bigger, more, more birthday parties, more yoga rooms, and there was a lot of money being made. And I think people maybe lost sight of the goals. And I would say that there's probably a renaissance of recognizing how important the climbing is. And there's a lot of kids, a lot of people your age who really love climbing. So, hopefully we'll have the best of both worlds. We'll have big aesthetic gyms with wonderful holds, and those will become more and more ubiquitous, because what I heard is that, no secrets there. Although I'm guessing that the barbecue yakitori place was amazing. And,
yeah.
So there's some good stuff in Japan that make me want to go and visit, even if it's, not just because of that mecca of indoor climbing. And it was cool. Like watching some of the videos of what it's like there. Yeah, it's just, it's funny because I think you said this, it's a little underwhelming, right? It's like, oh my God, B pump. And you're like, oh, it's just a gym, but it's really cool. And this stuff is really cool. And then talking it through with you, it's like, why can't we have that too? And we can.
It is really difficult. I think there needs to be, obviously it's possible. And I definitely see a future of all climbing gyms that possess some standard in these ways. But to possess that standard takes a lot of communication, discipline from gym employers and gym employees, and good teams, good conversations. I think, all things that people here can possess, but you're right in that I think with the booms and everything, climbing gyms and people who work at climbing gyms focus on a lot of other things. But that being said, climbers as a whole can obviously always get better, even with the compromised tools that we have at climbing gyms, like climbing on a bunch of, like I always use this thing for my youth climbers. Like if I gave you, a year to train for the Olympics, but suddenly gave you access to a woody with wood holds on it, would you be confident that you could still be better at performance from that time? And I always would argue yes. If you had just a woody with a random set of holds, you can always improve your performance. And then you go to the Olympics and yeah, you might be shocked at some holds that you're grabbing, but you still have like your things that you can control and you could always have improved that. And you and I, Josh, I've always said this, like if you and I just had a wood board with wood holds on it, like we would have fun. Every time, like every single time. So that being said, all this super critical high level analysis of a climbing gym, I hope, doesn't take away from the fact that we all love climbing, period.
Cool places breeds cool community, which breeds fun times, which breeds progress. So cool to hear about all that stuff, Tim. Just makes me want to go and visit Japan, as well as just get back into the climbing gym. I've definitely been just, in my garage on the moon board, and I'm excited to just, I don't know, I forget how much I love the gyms, but all right, Tim, that's Japan. You went to Japan, you brought back all the info, and it was really fun, man. I loved hearing about it. And yeah, I hopefully you stop traveling for a little bit and you, find some kind of consistency. Although I do appreciate you going around the world and bringing back these little, gems for us to discuss.
Oh, I'm here for it. At least for a couple more years. I'm always here for it. I will make a quick shout out. I think after going to B Pump, my favorite bouldering gyms in the world and my opinions on which ones are the best, I think are still the Boulder Field is very high on my list. The Innsbruck Kletterzentrum facility is definitely extremely high on my list. That actually may be number one, just in terms of the sheer volume and just how nice the facility is. B Pump is obviously up there. Block Shop in Montreal is definitely up there. I think there are a handful of gyms across, everywhere across the world that would definitely match that list. And I don't think there's a gym that stands far above any of them. So yeah, shout out to all those gyms. I think they're all doing a really good job. And it was cool to finally go to B Pump and just, check some opinions and have a good time. But I will say, if I was to pick which gym that I would climb at for the rest of my life, it would be B Pump Ogikubo. And I'll just say that just because every session that I had there I was constantly learning, constantly teaching myself, constantly pushing. I could not get out of the gym. I was just climbing constantly at that gym, and I have never had that experience. I haven't had it in a really long time, and that was really nice.
All right, let's end on that. And if any of you all out there agree or disagree or want to tell us anything about it, go to our podcast page, podcast.testpiececlimbing.com, and click that little microphone, leave Tim a voicemail and saying, you're wrong, you're right. You should have eaten at this place. Leave us some comments. And while you're there, sign up for our newsletter. And we'll see you next week.
All right, guys, take care. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Testpiece Climbing, you can check us out at testpiececlimbing.com and even book a session with one of our coaches.